Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first ever episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. My name is Doug. I'm co-hosting the show, and I'm here with Cricket, who's our star, and she is nicknamed the evil overlordess of shamanism, and she'll share why shortly. Today she's going to be talking to us about a shaman's view on perception. Mm-hmm. Cricket, why don't you tell us a bit about that?
I'd love to first explain why I got the nickname of evil overlordess of shamanism. I've been a teacher for a good number of years, and my students have noticed over the years that I don't have a lot of leeway for stupidity or inappropriate behavior, and if I tell you to do something, I really expect it to be done. And so they even made me a t-shirt that said evil overlordess of shamanism and gave it to me as a birthday present, and I coveted that shirt. So as a brief introduction to that is people perceive me as the evil overlordess of shamanism. So I really wanted to talk a bit about perception, aside from a joking aspect of perception. In a very simple fashion, this is how perception works. Perception, it establishes a meaning about an event, maybe an object, and that's when we make initial contact. And perception is essentially processing information. So when we are engaged in perception at this stage, when we make initial contact with something, all of our senses are engaged. So I'll give you some examples. One of the first things that I do before I do any type of shamanic work is I generally put on 2 different necklaces. Those necklaces give my body sensation of the heaviness of them and the weight of it around my neck. And that's the cue to my body that I'm moving into sacred space. Perception comes on many different levels. We have physical perceptions, we have emotional perceptions, we have mental perceptions, and we have spiritual perceptions. In the wisdom path that we're studying right now of knowing oneself, one of the deepest lessons that will provide us with ways of moving forward in the shamanic world is to become aware of our perceptions. And I'll often also refer to this as awake awareness or alert awareness, so that we have a context of how things change from one reality to the next reality. The very next thing that I do engages my sense of smell. So it is also in my physical realm, and that is the lighting of smudge. And the lighting of smudge allows my eyes to perceive that there is sacredness going on because I have associated smudge with sacred. I light my wooden match. I light my candle first. From the candle, then I light my smudge, and I take my time with the wooden candle or with the wooden match, lighting the smudge and making sure that all of the edges of it are lit, and slowly let that burn off, or we'll use feathers to smudge somebody. The reason that I use the external stimulus is because it is cued from my physical. My emotions will relax from the use of the smudge, and smudge is often touted as being something that is aromatic and that engages the senses, relaxes the central nervous system. The sense of smell can trigger all sorts of really wonderful events within the body. It is also, from that perspective, the scent and the wisping of the smoke lets me know after years of practice that I am now stepping even further. I've invited the spirits to come into the room by lighting the smudge. This is my sweet smell. This is my offering to the spirits. And those are aspects of cues with respect to how the things are going to change. Attention is another way of gathering information and processing. Attention occurs when we linger or engage our mental processing. So we're coming into the intellectual or the mental aspects of perception. So sometimes we engage our mental processing, such as how many times have we picked up a stone, right? And we've felt that energy off a stone, or we walk into a part of the forest and all of a sudden we feel something has really changed. So we are being touched with our attention. So selective perception is when I pay attention to messages. And these messages are going to be consistent with my attitudes, my beliefs, and my needs, such as when I light smudge, it is then my selective perception that I have sent a message to the spirits, and the spirits are really going to get back to me with that. My belief is that when I put on my necklaces, then I am protected. My need is I light a candle because that represents safety when I journey. So these are my selective perceptions. Now, interpretation, that's an interesting aspect of perception. Interpretation means I assign a meaning to whatever has stimulated my senses. Comprehension is aided by expectations and also familiarity. Unconsciously or consciously, we scan our memory to retrieve previous experiences, such as if I walk into someone's sacred space and I smell smudge, my memory is retrieving previous experiences with that smudge. So I already know I'm in sacred space, my body relaxes, and my spirits gather around. So we interpret knowledge of something based on what we are more or less familiar with. The end result or the conclusion of our perception process is retention. So some objects or maybe even events go into short-term or long-term memory. If it's a really good experience, it's often it's a marked experience. Does that make sense, Doug?
So far, so good. Yep.
So far, so good. Okay. So now that we have the basics, I want to go just a little bit deeper. So let's suspend our beliefs for just a moment. We would change our perception to encompass. Now this one, I like this one because this one, people kind of don't really see that. But as much as we are perceiving, we are also being perceived. So as we look at the universe looks back at us. So we are not alone in that respect. There is a give and take in the aspect of perception. When we journey, which is using our spiritual and our mental perceptions, in those situations, we are entering into a place that operates independent of us, so the spirit world. And my reality is that things in the spirit world watch me just as much as I watch other things. Now, the difference between what would be a daydream and what would be a spiritual trance or shamanic trance is that in the daydream, things operate according to what I believe is going to occur. So sometimes you have, let's take it from the negative. You have an experience with somebody, so you daydream about having that fight with somebody. But that everything that person says is going to be based on what you put out of their mouth. When we're in the spirit world, we have to suspend our disbelief that the world operates dependent upon us, and we have to engage the belief that the world runs independent of us. And I think that is an important aspect of perception, especially within the shamanic realm, for the very simple reason that we tend to not talk about it because there isn't really a lot of frame of reference, because people haven't suspended that aspect of their perceptions in it. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about in regards to perception is I want to talk about what helps us perceive things. So when we talk about the physical realm, let's say we can talk about the physical realm and we can merge that physical realm with the spiritual realm. One of the ways that it's not exclusive to shamanism, but one of the ways that we can do that is by using divination. And many people are familiar with tarot cards Many people are familiar with oracle cards and even power animal cards, although they're called totem cards, and I won't get into why that annoys the hell out of me. But anyway, divination has been long used by shamans and by many other people as a way of communicating with the spiritual world using something that is tangible. And one of the things I've realized over the years is that people really respect what is tangible. And when we do healing work, an extraction can be incredibly powerful for the perceiver and the perceived based on what their expectations are. If you're coming to me as a stranger, my reality is that you're going to perceive me as someone who is going to help you, but you probably have no idea how I'm going to do that. So in doing an extraction, I can do that extraction above your body with all of your clothes on, and if you are attuned to your spirit self or your internal self, you will feel the energy being removed from the body. Many people don't suspend their disbelief. They're coming to shamanism as a form of healing for whatever their myriad of reasons are. So my spirits have instructed me over the years to do an extraction hands-on. So to physically manipulate the body, to physically remove things from the body, in order to engage the conscious mind. So again, that changes the perception of what is going on. If you are feeling me tug at your skin, your perception is that I'm removing something. If you have a spiritual reality, then when I'm tugging on your skin, you can feel the energy being pulled out of your body. When we use divination, this is again a tangible form. Many people do not trust their own connection to spirit, and many people do not trust their connection in meditation or in journey work when they travel with a question that they're actually going to get an honest answer back, and not the answer they want to hear, or not the answer they put into the spirit's mouth. So divination is a way of asking the spirits to say, you know what, I have this question, and I want you to place things however you want to place things so that I get the answer. So what I use are called stones, bones, nuts, and teeth. And they are stones, they are nuts from a pinyon tree from South Africa, and they are bones that came from a witch doctor's kit from South Africa, and they are teeth, which is actually tooth, which is one of my teeth that I lost due to a severe cavity, and I use it in my stones, bones, nuts, and teeth as a way of indicating illness. And it's usually illness either directly in the body of the person who is throwing the stones, bones, nuts, and teeth, or depending on how it lands, it's also very related to the maternal side. So Doug, if you were to throw the stones, bones, nuts, and teeth, and if I were to see the tooth come cavity up very close to your body, I would say there's an illness inside of you. If you threw those stones, bones, nuts, and teeth, and the tooth landed a foot from you or 6 inches from you, but it still was cavity side up, I would ask about the health of your mother or the health of your grandmother. Because over the years, my perception has been that this tooth generally indicates X, Y, and Z. Right? So if we move back into that aspect of retention and interpretation, we can see where we have to have all of our wits about us. So when we throw in divination and we use a tool, we are engaging all aspects of ourselves. Our physical self, because we are touching the stones. We're engaging the mental self because we have asked a question. And we are now trying to figure out intellectually how those stones, bones, nuts, and teeth have answered that question. We are also engaging the emotional body because generally as the querent or the person asking the question, you have an emotional attachment to that question. And then we're engaging the spiritual body because that's the intuitive perception that aids us in gathering all of this information and putting it together in a format or in a means that can be relatable to the person who's asking the question, or even relatable to my own self. Right?
So how would that apply to someone who uses a more traditional, say, a tarot deck or something, where there's almost a prescription to what each thing means? How does the perception come into that type of divination?
I think from that perspective, it's really interpretation and retention. I think because there are the 78 cards in the actual tarot, in the normal tarot deck and not an oracle deck. And so in that, we retain knowledge. So our perception is in retention and interpretation of that in retention. So when we take it there one step further, we're also taking in a symbolic language because the tarot cards are a very symbolic language. So we have a definite system that we have learned, but there are a myriad of permeations of that symbolism within each and every reading. So I think that it is, further, or maybe another aspect of a formulaic form of divination where the more obtuse, or not maybe obtuse, but maybe the more obscure method of stones, bones, nuts, and teeth is a little more difficult to interpret because there aren't, 175 authors who've written on that particular subject already. And that, I think, is one of the fundamental differences, is that I think that there is identification, retention, as well as a spiritual interpretation, so we're using that, whereas the stones, bones, nuts, and teeth is more from an interpretive and intuitive perspective. But they're also physical, they're also mental, they also have that emotional component. They're both very valuable in interpreting what is going on from a divination perspective.
I know in a lot of your workshops, one of the first things you do is make people go collect their own set of stones and start from there. So
absolutely.
I'm thinking you have a bit of a preference for that direction.
I absolutely do. I think that in order to strengthen our perception, it's really important that we have our very own course of perception. I think that spirit is one of the greatest teachers of all. And in that regard, it is only sensible that spirit would give you an identifiable way of communicating with them as opposed to a formulaic or prescribed method. And the other aspect is that we don't often trust our perceptions. So I ask people to gather 7 stones. And in the apprenticeship class, I'm going to ask them to gather the 7 stones and paint the 7 stones. Because again, this is part of the wisdom path of learning oneself or knowing oneself. And so in this wisdom path, what I want to do is I want to give you, each person, encouragement in their perception, and know that perception is active awareness of all matters. So if we can throw away a predictable form of spiritual communication, then we are solely relying on our perceptions. And I'll give you an interesting example from another nature workshop that I had. And this was very funny. I actually really quite enjoyed this. It was a miserable, miserable day. And we don't have any type of shelter. It's a miserable day. Fortunately, there are many people who camp with me who are fantastic at bringing tarps, fantastic at bringing ropes. So we are always really, really well taken care of. Thank you, the men who camp. So one of the things that I'd asked them to do this time around was to bring stones with them, because we were going to interpret the stones in a blindfold manner. And I just happened to, I think, get the message that I needed to walk up to a particular group. I could feel this energy calling me. And I walked up very, very quietly. And the person who is going to do the reading using these stones has the blindfold on so that they don't know what they're picking up and they don't know. And again, this is more about perception. And as I walk up, I hear the one person who's got his blindfold on, doesn't know that I'm there, picking up his stones and going, "This is just really stupid exercise. I can feel that this is this stone because of this shape and this is this stone." And so when I said, "And how about you take a nice deep breath?" And his Adam's apple went straight up into his throat and straight down into it. And he was like, "Okay." and so I asked him to use his other senses. Because with his eyes, he knew what stone it was. But with his fingers, he knew what stone it was. But how does the weight feel in the body? How does it feel in the heart? How does it feel to throw those stones? So we have an example of someone thinking that it is really a dumb exercise to, once they threw the stones, blindfolded, onto a piece of paper with a bunch of circles on it, and where the stone landed within that set of circles, including the emotional, the physical, spiritual, and the mental, they were to interpret the stones based on how that fell. And it was a really interesting exercise. And after the exercise, the gentleman that I had caught out came up and did indicate to me that it was a really useful exercise, and was very grateful that I came up at the time I did, in order for his logical brain to step aside and allow the spiritual brain to come forward and do the work. So that was an interesting story on perception.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I suspect at some point we'll have to do a quick show on what that exercise is about and how to go about doing it, because if people are listening to this, they're going to be, what are you talking about? But we won't go down that path in this show, but
No.
In the future, absolutely.
I think that would be a great idea to do that.
Very cool.
And then the other aspect that I wanted to talk about in respect to awareness is that, we have all talked about the interrelatedness and the interconnectedness of all things. And I don't think that somebody has landed on this page or has landed on this podcast if they don't know that these things, or if this isn't part of their reality. And if this is brand new to you listeners, then I will be the first to pop your illusionary cherry and tell you that all things are interconnected and all things are interrelated and all things truly are alive. So when we shift from a singular perception up to the next, which is being perceived, so we talked about the perceiver and the perceived, we keep our ability to retain our singular perception, but now what's happened is we gain a much wider view of what we're experiencing. And I'll share with you a short story. A traveler comes across two stone cutters, and he asks the first, "What are you doing?" And he receives the reply, "Squaring the stone." He then walks over to the second stone cutter and asks, "What are you doing?" And receives the reply, "I'm building a cathedral." So in other words, both men are performing the same task, but one of them is aware he has the choice to be a part of the greater dream. So I think that we truly can see that in the aspects of perception. Standing alone, the candle to light the match, to light the smudge, is a singular form of perception. However, the greater whole is that wooden match that lights that candle ensures that my soul knows that I will always have a place to come home to, and the smudge is my olfactory way of telling my body that it is time to move into sacred space. So we are increasing the aspects, or the wave out, the collective awareness. So shamans begin with the collective, and then through the collective we heal the personal. And perceptions, when I work with the medicine wheel, I'll go very briefly into what are, I think, the aspects of perception. So we have the 4 states of man. We have the physical, and we've talked about this a number of times already, but I just want to be clear because I don't think I've sorted this out. We have 4 aspects of man, or woman, or person, or whatever aspect of gender you are referring to. So we have a physical perception, we have a mental perception, we have an emotional perception, and we have a spiritual perception. So the physical body takes care of the physical facts. The mental body allows the process, the intellectual process. I have to light that match. From lighting the match, I have to light the candle. From lighting the candle, I have to light la 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 la. So it gives me the routine. So my perception is shifted because of the routine. From there, we go into the emotional body. And the emotional body is generally associated with, that depth part, the psyche part. And then we have the spiritual perception, so the perception of that interconnectedness or that interrelatedness of all things. On the medicine wheel, we place our perceptions in different places as well. So we can say that in the east is the intellect. So the intellect or the mind resides on the eastern part of the medicine wheel. On the south part of the medicine wheel is fire, and so for many of us, we place that, the physical. The west is often considered to be the water, at least in North America, is water, so it's the emotional aspect. And then north is generally considered to be the place of the ancestors or the place of the spirits. So that's generally where we place spirit. So in each of those directions are also lessons. So if we go into the east, which is the intellect of perception, on the medicine wheel, we also learn that our perceptions are like those of the bird. So our perceptions have the ability, we go from that singular perspective to the collective perspective, that all things are related. So if I'm moving on the eastern part of the medicine wheel, then on the eastern part of the medicine wheel, I'm dealing with the bird. And if I'm dealing with the bird, then my perception is the perception of all around. Because birds generally fly, unless they, like they're a chicken or a flamingo or something, they can't fly. Then, we have that overview. So I think that that's an aspect of it. And I also think one of the other aspects that I find very interesting is that when we come to the south, the physical part, but south teaches us hard work. It's the place of the warrior, female or male. It really doesn't, or third gender, really doesn't matter what gender you are. The fire to me is the warrior. So it is the physical. It is that which propels me. So I have to perceive my body. When we are walking into a house, let's say we've got a job to do a shamanic clearing of the house. A person's house is having activity. So we bring all of our perceptions. We bring our singular perception and we bring our collective perception. Our singular perception gets us to the house. That's always very important. Our singular perception is the one that allows us to get together all of the individual tools we need. And sometimes our intuition comes in and says, oh, I think I'll take this stone, or oh, I think I'll take that stone. But for me, there's a set formula for what I bring into a house in order to do that clearing. So we have the physical perceptions. I have my mental perception because I mentally am preparing what I need to put together to do a house clearing. Then the emotional, I often will sit in my car and I have a process of prayers and I have a process of things that I do prior to going into the house. So I am putting my emotional energy out because I want to perceive how that person is feeling when they're telling me their story. Because body language only tells me so much, but the energy coming off of them helps me to perceive whether what's going on in the house is a nuisance, what's going on in the house could be frightening, what's going on in the house could be maddening for that person. So I really need to be emotionally aware at the same time. And then the other part that walks into that house with me is the intuitive part. It's that internal, that third eye that seems to scan the entire building or scan the house or scan the person to see where I can find the energy that is most disturbing to the person. So that's an example of using all aspects of perception. So we bring the warrior self into that house, not because we want to war with the spirits that are in the house, because that will never win you anything. But we bring the warrior because we have no fear. And if we have fear, then we don't show that fear.
It almost sounds like the perceptions you're talking about, from physical to mind to emotion to spirit. Mm-hmm. It almost sounds like a continuum, or you're going from the most grounded to the most
abstract.
Abstract, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that you're right. We do go from that. There is that aspect of moving from one to the other. And one of the things I think is that from going to one to the other, we are learning to understand our senses. And that's what's most important to us. Most of us are stuck in our physical bodies. So what we're going to perceive first is what affects us physically. And then many of us can sometimes marry our brain, our intellect, with our body. So some of us even have a relationship to think, oh, wait a minute, I'm feeling anxious in my belly. Therefore, when I go see Uncle Bob, I won't let his barbs get under my skin. Right? So, and then that's the mental body coming into it. So the emotional body, where does that affect me? That's another perception that we need to figure out too, is we have a physical body, but our emotions affect us physically. So where does the anxiety that Uncle Bob gives to us reside? Does it reside in our belly? Does it reside in our chest? Does it reside in our lower back? So in the progression of senses, it is a way of teaching ourselves to be aware of more than just what is in front of us or what we can densely apply to ourselves.
Right. So, and then the anxiety in the stomach, for example, is really the combination of emotional plus physical.
Yes.
It's just being conscious to separate the two and recognize them for what they are.
Absolutely. And then from the spiritual aspect, we try to figure out, some people would try to figure out what is the karma between me and Uncle Bob. Some people even take it further to go, what is the past life that I have with Uncle Bob? Some people, such as myself, when I do healing work within a family, I will draw a family tree and I will follow on the family tree where one thing leads to another. So how many were alcoholics? How many caused anxiety to women in the house? How many were women who had been abused and abusive to their own children? You know, those sorts of things. So I think that when we understand our senses, we gain a much deeper insight into our very selves and eventually into our very universe. And I think that that is something that is really quite important to us, is that aspect of perception. So when we move, I'm going to go further, when we go west on the medicine wheel, and we have placed our emotional body on the western part of the medicine wheel, and then when we go north, we place the ancestors, or we place the intuition onto that part of the medicine wheel. And I know in later chapters of our podcast, there will likely be a in-depth one in regards to the medicine wheel, but on shamansway.net, we have a really good article and series of articles that already have a good in-depth understanding of what the medicine wheel is.
Yeah, and absolutely, and we'll link to those in the show notes of this as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I am not quite sure where we want to go in the respect of the perceptions. The only other thing I think I wanted to touch on in respect to perceptions, because many of us, I feel, are on this particular path because we are interested in being healers. And there are many ways to perceive how your patients or how your processes are going. One of the things I've really noticed over the years in working with people is to have them be able to believe that they have the right to be healed comes from perceptions. And our perception of worthiness, our perception of our ability to heal, or the perception that our family, we will never escape our family. And these are realities in some cases. However, if we change how we view things, we change how things view us. And there was a stellar line in a movie of which I can't remember exactly what the movie was. However, what I really liked was when the actress said, "Oh, you really got caught in the moment." And the person turned around and said, "No, the moment got caught in me. Who said that the moment wasn't seen and using me?" I thought that was really very interesting. So we could say from that, how can we go back to a memory over and over and over again? Well, maybe the memory hasn't let us go. Maybe it's not about us. Maybe our perception is that we're being perceived and constantly watched by that memory. So what would happen if we journeyed to that memory and we changed that memory? Would we be able to stop obsessing about that memory? Would we be able to stop obsessing about how we physically, mentally, or emotionally changed because of that memory? So again, we come back to the perceived and the perceiver. Go ahead.
And it sounds like this can be used not only in the role as a healer, but in self-healing as well.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the aspects of the medicine wheel that is really been a part of my life is as you walk on the medicine wheel, and I mean that not necessarily from a physical perspective. You can walk on a medicine wheel, you can walk in a labyrinth, What I'm referring to is the longer you practice shamanism, what I've noticed is that the more you go around the medicine wheel. So when I started my journey started on the south. So I started off in the warrior position, then eventually went into the emotional position, and eventually met the ancestors, then eventually met east. And so how many years does it take to walk around the medicine wheel to come back to yourself depends on how much work you want to do with that. What I wanted to close off with is that there are many ways of changing our perceptions. So one of the ways that we can change our perception from a spiritual perspective is, by using a trance inducer, such as the rattle. We can use a trance inducer, such as the drum, which there are many drum tracks on our website that they can refer to. But the other thing in helping people change their perceptions, when I have someone, in my room for healing work, I will often place stones in their hands and ask them to hold those stones and either draw energy from the stones or put energy into the stones, depending on what I've perceived as the most beneficial aspect for them. The reason that I put stones in our hands is because I don't know very many people, period, who don't pick up stones or who don't look at stones. And some people are attracted to really fancy crystal stones, and some people are attracted to, those really flat stones for skipping across the lake. But we all have some relationship with stones. So when I have a person in a vulnerable place of healing, I like to place stones in their hands so that they have something tangible, something to focus their mental body, their emotional body, their physical body, their spiritual body, because the stones interact and engage all of the aspects of perception.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. So I think it would be really good to end it there, and we can pick up on another day with another topic. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on perception. It's been kind of fun to put it all together.
Well, thank you for pulling this all together and sharing it with us. And for everybody listening, there was obviously a lot of references made there, so we'll pull together some show notes, and you'll find those at shamansway.net, and we would definitely love it if you went over to iTunes if you're listening to it from there and gave us a quick thumbs up there as well. We'll talk to you next time.
Until next time, thank you.